Okay, there we go. All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing very, very well on this fine Monday afternoon or morning, or I guess whatever day and time it is for you as you watch this. But I'm really excited about today, and actually this whole week in general. I feel like this is a whole week of interviews. There's a lot of different people are bringing on, but this is probably going to be probably one of the longer ones that we do this week. Most of this week is the 5-minute language chats, but this one I'm really excited about. We're going to go really deep into a topic that I've been passionate about for a long time, that I love. It's my favorite thing about language learning, and this is just going to be a lot of fun. So our guest today is
Annie Rudin from Pronunciation Pro.
Yes. So Annie, actually, what we'll do here, so we'll spend the first chunk for you guys watching. We'll do a bit of an intro on Annie. We'll talk about what's her story, what's her background, what does she do, what is Pronunciation Pro. We'll talk a lot about that, and then we'll dig more into like the whole mechanics of pronunciation, like how do you improve it, maybe some processes, like why some people struggle, why others don't, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, like I said, because for those of you who don't know, not only I'm very passionate about pronunciation, but it's also something that, you know, in my life, just my ears, just for whatever reason, and maybe we'll find out today why, but for whatever reason, it's always come relatively speaking naturally, and being able to improve my own accent and everything has always come relatively naturally, and I've just kind of been like, oh, this is probably what I should do, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, Annie, I guess we'll start with you, like tell us a bit about you, like where are you from, like how, like, yeah, give us your quick elevator pitch about you.
Okay. I'll tell you a bit about myself. So I live in Arizona. I grew up here, and it's in the southwest part of the United States, very hot. I've lived other places in the US, but this is where I feel most comfortable. And but I married someone from Oregon, which is in the Northwest. And so when it gets really hot, we take off and go up to Oregon in the summertime. So we're actually taking off next week to go spend the summer there. So
I've heard, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I've heard that Oregon is very artsy, let's say.
Yes, very liberal, very artsy, very natural and organic. So we lived there for about 7 years, and beautiful place. The rain killed me. So especially being from Arizona, I was like, can't do it. So yeah, so we go up there and enjoy that beautiful setting in the summer. But and I'm youngest of 9 kids in my family, and so most of my family is here in Arizona. So it's nice.
9 kids, wow. That must have been crazy growing up.
Yeah, pretty crazy, but we're all very close. My parents did a good job of just kind of creating that little network there. So I actually have 4 kids myself, and which seems like a small family to me, but to most it's not. So anyway, I got into accent training. So I guess I should back up. My undergrad is in audiology and speech language pathology. So and then my master's was in communication sciences and disorders. And so basically what that did for me is, although I don't work in disordered language or articulation in accent training, it gave me a very, very deep understanding of articulation and phonology and the research that was associated with it. The program that I went to, my master's program, was very heavily research-based. And so we got into just all this research, all this just how to teach in a systematic approach that gets good results. And so there's kind of the language piece of, and it's really speech therapy is what I was trained in. So if you think of speech therapists, they, you know, usually work with kids or stroke victims, things like that. And I did for the first couple of years of my career. And then I found out about, well, I kind of knew about accent training, and we worked a little bit in school, but I had a supervisor after I finished my grad program who was in accent training and, you know, worked a little bit in it. And she turned me on to it. And so I started working with my first client, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is exactly what I love. Because I would always geek out on, and we were talking about this, Azren, a little bit, geek out on the the phonology, the articulation,
Yeah, so cool.
transcribing, you know, using the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. So I'd be listening to these recordings, and I'm transcribing it, and I would geek out on it forever. So I knew that I had a special love for that. So when I kind of discovered accent training, I was like, this is my thing, because it basically is all of that. I listen, I'm able to basically transcribe and identify error patterns and systems and things in my head, get those all mapped out. And then with my experience, I've been able to kind of like, okay, here, let's prioritize those in a way that will get you the best results the fastest.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's like, it's so, like, literally, it's so funny. Like, as you said that, and I didn't know you were going to say that, but it's
Yeah.
funny because, so the parallel I drew is because whenever I learn a lot of languages, I like learning languages and everything. And it's so interesting that whenever I listen to myself talk or other people talk, whether it is a native speaker of the language or it is someone who's learning the language, it's always like the default. My brain always goes directly to that, like, oh, it's interesting. That person really struggles with that sound and that sound. I wonder if they thought about, oh man, they're doing it with the tip of their tongue. I wonder if they don't even realize that the R is made at the back of the tongue, huh?
Yeah.
I tell them, oh, that's really, oh, that person. And then as I listen to myself, I'll be like, oh man, like I'll record myself often. Because I feel like it's easier to hear myself.
Oh, yeah, that's a great practice.
Right. And then I'll be like, oh, that's so crazy. I didn't know that I was like completely putting the stress on the wrong part of the word, or that I was doing, wow, my intonation's so off with that. And sometimes I don't even know the word for what I'm hearing. So I have to look it up and be like, oh, there's a thing for that. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's so like, I could do that all day because it's just so.
And that is not normal to have that level of mindfulness about the way you speak. Is not the standard. Most of our students don't have that awareness. So we have to train that awareness by introducing the rules and introducing how sounds work and how rhythm works and how this all plays together. And then their ear starts to open up, and it's like this light bulb goes on, and they're like, oh, I'm hearing things different, because they're being so much more aware of why they're sounding the way they do and what's making them sound accented.
Interesting. That's fascinating. So I guess let's just dive into some of the nitty gritty. Like, I guess if you're looking at, someone's trying to figure out, okay, I sound bad, or I don't sound great when I speak let's say English, right? What's like the starting point? What does the research say? Like, where should we be commencing?
Okay. So really what happens, unfortunately, is people start thinking, okay, I'm going to work on my pronunciation. I'm going to start watching this YouTube video here and this one here and this one here. And they just kind of collect all these blocks and this understanding of all these different areas, but they don't know quite how to build it. And so what we do is we create, and this is all based on research and, and things, it's just, we have to create a foundational understanding and foundational skills and listening skills. So what we start off with, and I talk about this, there's 3 easy tips, okay, to get us started, and something that we check back in with all the time. And it's one of those things, it's like you've probably been told this over and over again, but makes a huge difference. So the first is slow down. Everybody talks about slowing down, but really what happens is pronunciation and fluency is all about the muscle movements in your mouth. And if you don't slow down and you're going really fast, your mouth just doesn't physically have time to get into place. So you're not creating an atmosphere where pronunciation and good fluency can really happen. So you have to slow down at first to be able to get those positions in place, get that clarity, things like that. So foundational, we come back to that over and over again. In the advanced levels, you can speed up. Your mouth muscles are used to the movements enough. You've done enough repetition that you can start speeding up. But initially, it really is about slowing down. The second one, it is move your mouth. So a lot of languages, they kind of have it right here, and they don't really move you don't really move your mouth. It's just, a really slight movement. We got to move our mouth a lot more in English.
Is that I never thought about that before.
So you
Like
have to,
when you
yeah.
say move your mouth, I'm just trying to think of it. Like, do you mean like the lips, or are you saying like everything, tongue, lips, like teeth, like everything is really like, what do you mean?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because when I'm working with my students, and even at the very beginning, because we haven't even talked about where our tongue or lips or teeth should be, but that awareness of slowing down and moving your mouth gets this precision that that they weren't getting before. So just that mindfulness of being aware of their mouth starts bringing out a lot more of that deliberate pronunciation. Okay, so
Where
maybe
are most of your students from?
Oh, we have them for everywhere. I think the last time I checked, there were like 65 different countries all over the world that we were representing, but a lot of Asian countries. We have like a lot from India, a lot from China and Japan and Korea, Philippines, and then quite a bit from Brazil, and a lot of Spanish speakers as well. We have a lot from the Middle East.
How did you notice that like people like other languages didn't move their mouth as much? Like it's an interesting capture.
So so I worked one-on-one. So here's kind of how it evolved is I worked one-on-one with students for several years. And I realized that no matter what language base I was working with, I was repeating the same things. And I was realizing that there were certain and obviously it gets more customized and specialized, based on it. But there were foundational skills that had to be there. And that I was repeating a lot of the same skills, same lessons. And I realized that there were certain skills that need to be worked on first, second, third, fourth, and built on each other. So like those blocks I was talking about, you just kind of have to know how to stack them so that you're creating long-term results. And that understanding was there. And so so we talk about the 3 easy tips. So moving your mouth, speaking up, just speaking louder is the third tip. Speaking louder, having more volume to your voice. So if you don't have those 3, then it doesn't matter where your mouth is or where your tongue or your lips or your teeth or any of that, or what the rhythm is doing. All of that doesn't matter because you're not doing the core stuff. Okay. So those 3 tips are huge and you have to have those. So,
it's interesting to hear that. Like, this is again, it's just real. I'm just been really excited to talk to you, but because I don't remember if I said it during the recording, but I was telling you before that like a lot of stuff I would just do because I'd be like, oh, that worked, so that helped me, or what, like it would just come naturally to my brain. And it's so funny because I have like a saying that I've always said to myself, and I usually say to other people if it applies, is to speak twice as loud and twice as slow as you feel like you should be.
Yes.
Like whatever you have in your brain, double the volume and reduce the speed by 50%. And I find as a result, what that tends to happen is, I don't know why, but when you're talking about the mouth, I asked you about lips and everything on purpose because I was thinking like, man, because I always notice when people speak louder and slower, whenever I say like that, I notice it would almost be like, regardless of the language, I feel like their mouth is going like, hello. Like
it forces big movements. Yes, it forces big movements. Yeah.
And it's just it's fascinating.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to real quick. The reason why things have come so easily to you, I think there's probably a talent there and things, but I kind of read about your history, and you started learning different languages at a very young age. Okay, so you had exposure to several different languages before you even reached 10, 15, years old. And the research shows that when you're exposed to different sound systems of different languages at young ages, it gives you an advantage in language because there are different neural pathways that are developed. Whereas if you were only exposed to one language until you were an adult and then you started learning English or learning, another language, it's much harder to establish those neural pathways and even just to be able to hear those sounds and hear the differences in languages because those pathways have not been developed yet.
Right. Right.
And so it, you know, for you to be able to be like, oh, that comes naturally to me, has a lot to do with how many languages and how many sound systems you were exposed to, without being directly even taught it. Even just being exposed to it and being around it and hearing it, you see kids will pick up on languages so much faster than adults.
Mm-hmm.
And they will acquire the accent so much better than adults.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does, there's kind of this threshold of after about age 18, 20 years old, when you start, and it even in the 20s, it's a lot more placid. Your brain's a lot more placid, but it does become more of a challenge.
I'm assuming that's with pronunciation and accent. I'm assuming not just with language learning as a whole. It's not my assumption.
I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure what the research says about just language learning in general, but accent, absolutely.
Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. So, and not to frustrate any adults who are trying to kind of learn accents.
That's exactly where to go. So how do you, yeah.
So, but it just requires more repetition, more practice, more deliberate training. So it just won't come as naturally to you, but it can be developed. And some people have a natural talent and will be able to sound completely native. Some people, they'll work and really struggle to achieve that native sound. Because there is a little bit of a level of talent that goes into it and just how they're able to do it. But we found that with kind of systematic approaches to it, you're going to get the sounds of English, because really the accent is just the sounds of English and the rhythm of English. The sounds of English is very like exact. You have to have your mouth in this position. You have to have, I mean, it is an exact science. The rhythm of English becomes more like music. You know, there are some very specific rules like word stress, sentence stress, linking, pausing, rate of speech, just kind of how you hang on words and what you do with the rhythm. There are certain, like, you have to do this. If you stress a word incorrectly, it will be wrong. Mm-hmm. You know? So there's, like, for example, a French student was saying, I am a consultant.
Yeah.
Consultants. And it's like, okay, in English, we'd stress, instead of the last syllable, we stress consultant, yeah. Second syllable, mm-hmm. Right? Where I'm a consultant. Okay, so there's a hard right and wrong in the rhythm there. But as you get more advanced in your rhythm, it gets more like music. You kind of have to feel it. Mm-hmm. And so it does get more advanced and more complicated, but the actual pronunciation and being able to hear it, we do a lot of listening exercises through the program so that they can hear the difference between what they're saying and what a native speaker would say.
Is that a thing where people cannot hear the difference in what they say and what someone else is saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're saying, so a good example is most languages don't, most of our students come in with an incorrect TH sound. Okay. So they say either D or T. So duh instead of the.
Okay.
And they say, or the with a Z. A lot of the more Asian languages use a Z instead of a TH. The instead of the. Mm-hmm. Okay. And to them, it's because they're carrying over the sound systems of their first language into English. And TH isn't in their sound system. And so the closest thing that they have to it is a D or a Z. Mm-hmm. And so they're hearing it as that. So until you specifically teach and compare the sounds and say, here's what you're saying, here's what a native speaker would say, they'd be like, oh.
So when you compare them and you go, hey, here's what you're saying. You're saying the instead of the. And mm-hmm. And there's a recording where you really contrast it side by side.
Yeah.
Do most people, or are all people, or what percentage of people are able to go, oh yeah, I hear the difference?
Yeah, probably 80% are able to hear the difference right away.
Yeah.
Another 15%, it's like we work through the listening quiz. Maybe we have to go through it a couple of times before they start hearing it. And this is really true with vowels. Vowels are really difficult for a lot of our students to hear the difference, like the ah and the mm-hmm. hot, hut.
Mm-hmm.
Like hearing that difference in the vowel. gets really tricky for them. So we might have to go through the vowel listening quiz more often. But then there's like this 5% where you really have to teach it and train it and practice it, things like that. But that doesn't happen all that much, probably 2%.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I always think like if I can teach my mom something pronunciation wise, then it's great, because she really just finds it very difficult, and hearing the difference between certain sounds is very difficult for her. I mean, even actually, this isn't a mom example, but it's something I've noticed very, very common. So in Spanish, for example, the T and the D actually are very different than English. Like we have alveolar T's and D's, right?
Yeah.
But Spanish has dental, right?
Yeah, and that's why they do it for
and
the TH.
It's so interesting that both English learners learning Spanish and Spanish learners learning English both struggle to even hear the difference between like ta or the. They go, it's the same.
Right. And it takes a higher level of just like sound awareness to be able to get that. It's trainable, but it does take training.
Well, I guess let's dig in. It's like, what would be like a process for teaching or to help? Like, what is you mentioned a few times now, there's like a system you should follow, systemized approach as a process. Like what is that process?
Yeah. So we get in, we talk about like some of the more foundational things that we talk about. Obviously, we go into 3 easy tips. I jump out the gate off, I go straight into ending sounds. A lot of students will drop off the ending sounds, or they'll do a voiced versus voiceless ending sound. So they'll do a voiceless instead of a voiced. So what that means is I do this exercise where I say, okay, let's do these minimal pairs is what we call them. Or these, the minimal pairs. So we do a voiced and a voiceless. So if you put your hand on your throat and you do duh, 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 that's a voice sound. Your throat is vibrating. You can feel it. Okay. There's a vibration there. So the D, tongue behind your teeth, duh, 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 kind of burst out of there. The T sound, the mouth is exactly the same. There's no difference in the way we say it in the mouth. The only difference is we turn off our voice. Okay. And so a lot of times our students will confuse voice and voiceless sounds. And so you have to bring that awareness of what, a voiced sound is versus a voiceless. S and Z is a very common one where they're doing one or the other and they don't realize there's a difference. And so you start with that. So you want to work on ending sounds and get ending sounds really solid.
So when you say ending sound, I'm just trying to understand myself. An ending sound, do you mean like the last syllable of a word, or what do you mean by ending
sound in the word?
Last sound. So if you have the word, for example, sound, it's like
D is the ending sound. Yeah.
Okay.
D is the ending sound. So a lot of our, especially Spanish speakers, they'll kind of drop or minimize the ending sounds of words, especially D and T. That's, and D and T native speakers do it quite a bit too, but there's a different way that we do it than a Spanish speaker. A Spanish speaker would say sound, the sound is off. And English speaker, sound is off. We'll link it to the next.
Would you say that's like, you have your 3 keys, slowing down, moving your mouth more and speaking louder. Would you then move on to saying, okay, let's look at your ending sounds? Is that kind of like the next step in the...
So the way that my program is set up is that there are the core of the program is a 12 module course, and each module has about 4 videos. And so I found that as I was teaching, I was repeating myself a lot. And when you're repeating yourself, your quality goes down, right? The quality of how you're teaching it goes down. So I decided, okay, we're going to put that in video form so I can do my best teaching. They can go through the videos and then free up my time for feedback and being able to give that individualized, customized attention. So that's how my whole program is set up. So with like module 1, we do 3 easy tips. We do ending sounds. We do voiced and voiceless sounds, things like that. Then we move on to specific sounds. So I find that the TH sound has to be worked on early on. And because it takes a lot longer to develop than some of the other sounds.
Or both? Both.
But once they get the voiced, once they get the mouth position, it's pretty natural to do voiced versus voiceless. I very rarely have to teach voice and voiceless with the TH sound because a lot of times instead of the TH sound, they're doing either a D for voice sounds or they're doing a T for voiceless sounds. So they're always getting, they tend to get the voiceless thing naturally anyway.
Got it. So first you're going unit 1 is a lot of those keys you mentioned, so ending sounds, slowing down, moving your mouth more, speaking louder, right? A lot of those. Then you're going, is it a one module on a lot of your pronunciation? Or you're going through separate models that go through like the different sounds of English?
Yeah, so I go through the most common, difficult sounds of English and the rhythm of English, and we kind of go back and forth. I talk about zooming in and zooming out. So we zoom in on the sounds of English, and then we zoom out to focus on the rhythm. So there's a lot of zooming in, zooming out through the first 6 or 7 weeks, and then, or modules. And then after that, it's like, okay, let's bring it all together. Let's start kind of working it into reading passages and using it in simple conversation and presentations, that kind of stuff. So there has to be kind of that core foundational understanding of the rules, how all the rules that go along with intonation, when we rise and when we fall, in our intonation. Why do we rise? Why do we fall? What situations have that? Like we, in English, we rise at the end when it's a yes or no question, or when we are like listing things, like we're not quite done. And so we go up, and it helps our listener know that I'm not done yet, I'm not done yet. So keep listening, because I went up with my intonation. Whereas when we come down in our intonation at the end, it kind of wraps up that sentence. So we have students that will, when they talk like this, and everything is up at the end of their sounds, end of their sentences. And so it can create some confusion as to whether it's a yes or no question, or whether it's they're not done yet. So that you have to kind of have those rules in place and understand those rules so that you can start using them.
Got it. Right. So it's almost like going, first, let's go through the rules. Hey, here's how the pronunciation's working. Here's how the rhythm works. Here's like the almost the foundations like that you should know before you even try and improve your accent or whatnot. And then from there, now they're okay, I know the rules, I know how it works, etc. Let's do some different activities to put this together to give you an opportunity to practice it and to once the theory is one thing, but putting into practice something completely different.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's so much of this is so practical. You can't just read a book about accents and get know how to do it. And a lot of times my students will just like listen to the videos, but I require a lot of like, you repeat it out loud, you read it out loud, you do things out loud. All the worksheets and MP3s and things that I provide with my program, they're expected to do it out loud with me. Because it's like learning to ride a bike by reading a book. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, you got to have instruction to know how it works, but then you got to start practicing it and get that repetition.
Right. What are some different activities you do to help people practice the rhythm, and the rhythm particularly?
So one thing that I really like to use is we'll use speeches. Okay, so speeches are really good because it's just a transcript of someone giving an oral presentation, right? So TED Talks are really great. So I'll get a transcript of something, and then we'll go line by line and talk about, okay, where does it need to rise and where does it need to fall? So the rhythm of English is really stressed, and a combination of stressed and unstressed syllables and words. Okay, so you're going up and up, up and down and up and down. In English, the rhythm is more like up and over a hill, whereas some languages are like upstairs, up and down, up and down, up and down, really dramatic. Whereas English is da 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 da. So we're ramping up and we're ramping down, and we're going up and we're going down. And so understanding, being able to just even use, instead of words first, we start with da da. Okay, how are you, right? Da da da. Da da da, and just being able to get that rhythm in place. Da da da. You take other common phrase. Where are you going tonight? Da 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 da. We match the syllables with the does. Da 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 da. and just kind of practice that rhythm, because it's really the music of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really zooming in and getting the sounds, and then you zoom out and say, okay, let's get that rhythm. Once we kind of have the sounds in place with that specific sentence, and we know that we're getting in place, now let's zoom out and kind of feel that rhythm of it. What do we stress in this? What's the meaning or intent of the message? What words should we emphasize and hang on and saying longer, louder, with more stress or emphasis?
Do you start more with ear training, or do you start more with, let's say, articulation, mouth training? Or is it a bit of both?
So the way it's set up is I have different packages. One is a self-study course, and they can go through the videos, but then I have study groups every week that I do, and they can show up to those as much as they want. So they're going through the video course, and then they want to get some feedback. They come to the study groups, and we talk about it. So I always want them to go through the video first, go through and practice the MP3s and worksheets, but then come to me and make sure they're doing it right, because you don't want them to practice it incorrectly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I have other packages where they go through a module, they'll watch all the videos, and then they'll send an assignment to us. And I say us, I have a couple other trainers that work with me too. So send us an assignment, we listen to it, we give our feedback, we send a recording back saying, this is what I heard, this is what it should be, and kind of give that feedback. So then they take it and practice it from there. So this is research-based as well, is the feedback is such an important part. Now you can go and do your own thing, but when you have that feedback and you have someone listening to you and making sure, okay, here's what you're doing, and here's how you can kind of adjust it, or yeah, you're doing it right, keep going with that. That makes a big, big difference in how fast you can progress. So my whole program involves feedback.
Mm-hmm. So if you look at it from, maybe let's combine your experience, but even just a lot of the research, is it possible for someone, or not is it possible, but let's say, does someone have a good chance of being able to take, maybe not get a perfect accent or perfect pronunciation, but improving it two, three steps without necessarily having someone work them through it and help them out with it? Is that?
Yeah, it is possible. And I've seen some of our students, it's remarkable, because I'll get students who signed up, they went through the program, I didn't really hear from them the whole time, and then they send us, at the end, they'll send me an email and just say, oh my gosh, it helped so much, I was able to get this job, I was able to get into, there was one that was like, I was able to get into this international school that I've really wanted to get into. Being able to do all this stuff, a lot of it, they're learning the clear skills of how to do it. Right. Another huge part of it is confidence. So they come in and they're so not confident because people are asking them to repeat themselves. They're like, can you say that again? And then it just shuts them down. Yeah. And they're like, I don't want to speak up, because every time I do, I'm asked to repeat myself, or they don't understand me, or they kind of dismiss what I'm saying because my accent, or they can't understand me clearly. And so what we get all the time is, I've developed this skill through the program, either just going on their own or coming and getting help with us as well. And at the end, they're like, I feel so much more confident speaking English because my interactions are actually positive and I know what to do to correct myself. Not that there's not mistakes every once in a while, but it's like they make a mistake and they're like, oh, I understand why they didn't understand me. I wasn't using this tool that I have learned, so that then they are able to go and use it effectively and correct themselves. They hear it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are some common, I guess if you have to think through, like, what are the most common pronunciation or rhythm, we go either way, pronunciation or rhythm errors that you've noticed, and what are like some major things that you did to help them through it?
Some major things, so that depends on their native language, what tends to be the most problematic.
Like, let's say, for example, like I know, I'm just reading through the chat here, like R's and L's for Japanese people. Mm-hmm. Like, someone type that in the chat. Or like V's and W's, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you, let's take like an R and L scenario. Like, how would you help someone work through that?
Yeah. So R and L, what we do first is we explain the sound. We explain the difference. So L and R, we explain kind of the difference. So L, O. What we're doing is we put our tongue between our behind our front teeth. That's called a light L. There is a dark L, like pull.
Or like mall, or yeah.
Yeah. But I find that the dark L gets confusing, and it really is not, like, if you just use a light L all the time, it's gonna get you 90% there. Because even in connected speech, if the next word starts with a vowel, we still pull over, we still launch off of, right?
And I'm laughing because I heard it, but I know that no one else heard it.
Oh, yes, I'm sure. So let me do it quieter. So pull. I don't touch the roof of my mouth. Pull over. I'm touching the roof of my mouth before I lead into the vowel that's next. Okay, that happens anytime a dark L is followed by a vowel. Okay, so more often than not, just using a light L, and it's tangible. La, 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 la. I can feel my tongue touching. The difference between the American R, and I use my hand because this is like my tongue, okay? So my hand is my tongue in my mouth, and the back of my tongue comes up and touches. So the same part of the tongue that does the k, 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 the K sound, or the g, 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 g sound, if you feel that, if you do that sound, g, 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 and feel that part of your tongue touching the roof of your mouth, that's the same part of the tongue that needs to be up for the R. So what happens with Japanese students is their tongue is retroflexed, which means their tongue, when they do the R, their tongue comes up and touches the roof of your mouth, which is where the L is, right? Right?
Yeah.
So we have to get that tongue tip to come on down and control the tip of the tongue so that it's not sounding like an L. So road, race, rock. And so when we teach the R sound, there's 3 different positions, same mouth position, but there's 3 different R sounds. There's their initial R blends, and R vowels. And a lot of times when we break it apart and we listen, you have each one of those divided up, they might be able to do R blends just fine, but they can't, or they can do initial R, but they can't do ending R or R vowels. So there's a way that we pair it. So like overread, they can't say over. They can't maybe it sounds like ova, but they can say red. So we do overread and get that strong, and then they can break it apart. So there's those strategies that we use that can help kind of bridge the gap, instead of like, oh, just say it this way. And they're like, I'm trying and I have no idea how to get it there. There's strategies that can help us like bridge that gap and get them saying it correctly.
And like an R and a W, how do you help people break apart from that?
Yeah, so that one, what happens is so much of it depends on the mouth position. So wah is rounded. Wah. The tongue is pretty neutral in the mouth. Wah. In the R, the mouth is neutral. The tongue is what's engaged. So what has to happen is first we do a listening exercise and we compare it. So if they don't hear it, we're not even going to be able to work on it. So they have to hear it first. And then once they hear it, they're like, okay, I can hear the difference. Then we explain the mouth position. We go through words with that target sound. So like if they're needing, W versus R, say they're not able to do the R, they're doing W instead. So we're doing red, rice, right. We're going through word by word, and it's in time intensive. It's, it takes some real discipline to do, because you have to make sure that that's really strong before you then go into sentences. Okay. And then we put it into some simple sentences, and we link it to other words until we can get it real strong.
And is that like a similar process? Like, let's say you've got someone who is, maybe they're, and actually before I ask this question, I know we've gone a little bit over. Do you have time still, or are you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So, I just want you to be late for anything. So cool.
Yeah.
So let's say you've got someone who's, let's say they speak English quite fluently, like maybe they've been in America or Canada or whatever. They've been somewhere for a long time. They've worked there for a while. They understand everything. They can get anything they want to say. There's no struggle anymore. But they've got, let's say, maybe not the worst accent in the world, but let's say they got a relatively thick accent. It's quite noticeable. And, they speak very fluently per se.
Right.
Would you, even for that scenario, would it start? I assume yes, but I'm assuming you would need to slow it down first to go, whoa, hang on, there's a lot of fundamentals you're breaking that you've got bad habits with.
Right.
That kind of where it starts with them too.
You have to, yeah. And that's the majority of our students are in that boat where they have been speaking English for a long, long time, even if it's your native language, but in a different accent. And they come to the US and they're like, nobody understands me when I'm speaking my native language. But we have to bring it all the way back, and we have to build that tower with the right foundation and get those skills in place for them to correct those habits. You're breaking old habits, you're establishing new ones, and it takes time and consistency in your practice over a longer period of time to make sure that habit is corrected for the long term. And it's interesting because we have students, a lot of our students is like, they don't use it all the time. It's like this, they can switch, kind of code switching. They can switch into, if they're speaking with other people in their native tongue, native language, or people from their country in English, they know that they're going to understand each other. It's just, they switch into that. But then they're with native speakers and they know that they need to be very clear. They come back to the 3 easy tips, which then just pulls them into this mode of speaking that they've been practicing through my program. So, there is some switch. You don't have to always be speaking that deliberately because it can be exhausting if it's not, totally automatic yet. So that they can kind of use, but they have that tool, they have that skill set now that they can choose to use when they want to.
That's super cool. I'm fascinated. This has been very fun.
Yes. I can geek out for hours about this. So I'm one of those that I love all this. So
I'm like holding back to so much. I'm be like, oh, like this so many times, like, nope, Azren, shush, it's okay.
I love it.
You asked her to come on. You didn't ask her to go, and this, anyway.
Hey, if you have questions or anything specific to you, then we can.
Oh no, it's just as you're talking. It's just really. I guess you could say it's similar with language learning because I've always been around languages, and so as I would start to learn about, it's funny because when I go back into when I started to talk about languages, it was very similar. I'd done some research on how the brain acquires language and how it works and how others struggle with it, how some people, but it was very, it was just kind of jumping in with going like, I know I understand it. I know a lot of these fundamental rules. I know I just get it, but I've never really spent time on bringing it to like a conscious knowledge. And then it was very interesting as I was going through, as I was starting to meet people who are learning languages, talking to other people who teach languages and everything, I'd be like, oh, I've always known that, but I didn't know that was backed up by research. Or, oh, I've always done that, but I didn't know that blah, 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 blah. And it's just funny as I'm listening to you talk and it's going, oh, that just makes so much sense. I didn't know that was a thing, but like unconsciously I knew it was a thing, right? Like I knew, but I didn't know that it was like an established concept or like even as, for example, as you're talking and you're talking about, for example, like you're showing the tongue with your hand, right? Yeah. I'm just going, oh yeah, like that, like even just the way you did that, I was going, oh, I didn't know that was a common thing that would be done, but I did know unconsciously. Like it just surprised me that to see you do it. I was like, oh, that just makes so much sense. Is that not? You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah. Yeah, and the more you teach it, this is what I've found is the more I teach it, the more you develop other skills that you're like, oh, they caught on to that really fast when I used that strategy, you know, and so there is a lot of learning that takes place just by repetition. You're teaching it over and over and over again. You realize that, oh, students respond right away when I do it this way. And so you get, you know, faster progress just because of the repetition.
So last two things, and I'll wrap it up. So number one, one thing, and I'm just asking you this for selfish reasons. One thing that I've noticed that helps me a lot, and people that I've helped, is being able to find like what I call halfway sounds. So for example, I'll give an exaggerated example. This would never happen, but an exaggerated example would be, let's say someone could not do let's say they couldn't do a G, okay? But they could, you know, they couldn't do a G every time I wish I can find a more practical example, but this is the one coming to mind. Instead of doing a G, they did a T. Very different parts of the mouth, right? They're going ta, or let's say a D, because that's voice. Let's say a D instead of a G. And they're going duh, and you're like, no, guh. And they're like, duh, right? Almost going, can you get them to do something like a yeah? Because if you go from a duh to a yeah, it's a step towards a G. And if they understand the movement in the mouth of going, okay, they hear the difference, right? But they don't know what to do. And you get them, okay, can you do a yeah? And they're going, yeah, they can do a yeah. And they're understanding the movement in the mouth of moving that tongue and that. Okay, keep doing that motion further back.
Yep.
Right? Like, is that a thing?
That is the thing. It's called approximation. Cool. So, yes. So you're figuring out things that just are intuitive to you and in the training process. But are a thing. So approximating that sound, that sound, so that you are getting something close to, so that they have that awareness in the mouth, because it's so hard sound, you know, the movements and the fine tuning that happens inside your mouth, where you can't really see exactly what's happening in your mouth. You can only feel it. You have to use kind of points of reference that they're familiar with, so that they can get that awareness. So exactly what you're talking about. And that's that approximation we use, like I said, with the R sound, is if they can do an R sound in one position, I can use that, you know, to approximate that into other positions.
Exactly where that was my last thing I was going to end on was, it reminds me so vividly of it when the first sound I ever remember really struggling with, apart from a Spanish like rolled R, but that's a completely different story. But the first one I remember being like, man, I wish I could do this. Like, what the heck's happening? Is a French R, which is like, right? Yeah. And I remember being I was in France at the time, and it was so difficult. And it's interesting. My one friend, and I don't know where he learned it from, where he got the idea, but it made so much sense. He's like, well, okay, when you try and do a r, right, you should try and do it with the word is croix. And right? And the reason he said is because if you look at, he didn't know why, but it just made sense to him intuitively that C's are pronounced in the back of your mouth, right? R is just slightly further back. So to go from a C to a, to make those sounds together, it's much easier than, for example, and then the next word he gave me was trois. So starting with a T. Yeah. And then going back, right? And then the third word he gave me was théâtre. Now there's more than one syllable. Yes. Right? And so you're doing more. Then he gave me a voiced version. So instead of going was r. Yeah. Then he gave me, I think it was regarder. Right? No, sorry, it wasn't. It was roi. Right? So now it's voiced. And then he gave me regarder. Now there's two R's. And it was so interesting, the process of learning that sound. It was, and I don't remember if he definitely gave me the first word to practice, the first two words to practice with. Or definitely the first one. I don't remember where the process came, why that order of words. Yeah. But it was so interesting, like just in hindsight. I wish I remembered exactly how it played out because it was over 10 years ago. But it was so interesting to find, like, as you're talking about like building, it was cool to see how that, like, the building started. Let's start with the easiest possible word with this sound, right? Then let's make it slightly more complex and slightly more complex. Okay, now let's go to the voiced version, the easiest voice version. Okay, slightly harder voice version, okay? And just nailing one, like I remember every day, my goal was to pronounce the one word I was like, I can mess up every R all day, but I just want to get the one word right every day, and I'm going to use it. I don't know, like the word Hua means king. I don't remember how I use the word king every day, but I was like, I need to use it once a day and just nail that word. And then you try and nail the next word, and then you nail the next word. And then once you have that base of words that use the different versions, suddenly I would find that, oh, the other words are not hard to say anymore. It was just,
yes.
yeah.
Okay. You just described exactly that building block method, the strategy. Because if you start with certain sounds, you don't have to open up the dictionary and go word by word. Like that doesn't make any sense. That's dumb. You go through processes. If you go through processes and patterns and you develop a core of that sound, the right kind of core of that sound, then it spreads. Okay. And if you develop this core, then it spreads. You don't have to go through every single word that has that sound. It doesn't make any sense to do it that way. So that's that effective strategy of building piece by piece. So beautiful. That just described it like nail. Perfect.
Nice. Well, let's wrap this up. Like I said, I could go, I must read the chat, make sure I didn't miss anything overly important. I don't think I did, but no, I didn't. Andy says, yeah, no, nothing overly important. So well, thank you so much for your time. This is, again, I've been looking forward to this. So
yeah,
everyone, I've put Annie's website and her YouTube in the description. I highly recommend her YouTube. It's really good. It's especially for, I know there's a lot of you that watch my stuff from Russia. And so like there's a lot of non-English speakers that watch my stuff. Like I think it's a pretty good mix, but there's a lot of non-English, like non-native English speakers. I highly recommend you check it out. There's some really good stuff on our YouTube. So yeah.
Awesome.
Any final thoughts, Annie, that you want to share before we finish up?
No, I just think that it's possible, and I think that if anyone who's listening is struggling with their confidence in speaking English, and it's because they're just misunderstood, they're not able to, not necessarily the language, because I'm not an English teacher, I don't do grammar, vocabulary, that kind of stuff. But if you feel like it is your accent that's getting in the way, there is a way to address that and to develop that skill of speaking clearly. And it brings just so much more confidence. And, one thing that I just am so passionate about is we have these people that are brilliant, and brilliant and have so much expertise and so much, experience and the perspective that they have and everything. And I feel like they're not being utilized as effectively in their careers and in their, in their lives because of just this communication barrier, just this accent. And it's fixable. It's something that you can address and you can strengthen, and then give them that confidence to speak up, in meetings and to go for that promotion and go for that job and give them that confidence and that skill set, and just step back and see what they can do. It's absolutely incredible.
Cool. Well, yeah, it's definitely true. So, all right, let's wrap it up there. Let's end this. See you guys.
Bye-bye.